And hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another video with your host, Mono Entertainment. And today we are doing our very first AP World History reading with Unit 1, the Global Tapestry, from c. 1200 to c. 1450. And also, before we begin, I really hope you guys like this video, and this is something new I'm doing on my channel, where I'm actually going to be doing some read-alouds, and if you guys would like, if it is voted upon, perhaps, on maybe a future poll, or asked for in the comment sections, maybe I'll do some more read-alouds of maybe various other books. However, I hope you guys enjoy this, and let's dive right on in. Unit 1, The Global Tapestry, from c. 1200 to c. 1450. Understand the context. Between 1200 and 1450, several large empires emerged around the world. Some were modified revivals of earlier empires in their region. Others represented new developments. All were shaped by the context of regional trade, which had been increasing since around 600. The revival of large empires. Between 1200 and 1450, the wealthiest and most innovative empire in the world was the Song dynasty in China. It was the latest in a series of states that had ruled a unified and prosperous China. Similarly, in Mesoamerica, the rise of the Aztec was influenced by an earlier empire under the Mayans. Two other centers of great intellectual achievement, Baghdad and Spain, reflected the emphasis on learning in the Islamic world. However, in parts of Africa and Southeast Asia, the growth of regional trade produced larger and more complex states than had previously existed in those regions. Trade across the Sahara resulted in the West African empires of Ghana and Mali. Trade in the Indian Ocean provided the context for large states in Zimbabwe, in East Africa, and various other states in India and Southeast Asia. Unity in Central Eurasia. Shaping the context for events throughout Eurasia between 1200 and 1450 was the remarkable emergence of the Mongols. A group of nomads from Central Asia, the Mongols conquered lands from Central Europe to the Pacific Ocean, creating the largest land empire in human history. The conquest came with great devastation. However, the unity of so much territory under the rule of one group allowed trade to flourish once again across Eurasia, with new ideas and technologies spreading easily. These developments set the stage for the intensifying global interactions that helped define the period after 1450. And also, as you can see here on page 1, we also do have a small timeline here as well, which may be very important when looking at events in 1200 to 1400. Chapter 1.1, Developments in East Asia. Quote, "From now on, our ordinances will be properly enforced and the morality of our people will be restored," end quote. Ming Dynasty, Prohibition Ordinance, 1368 to 1644. Essential question. How did developments in China and the rest of East Asia between c. 1200 and c. 1450 reflect continuity, innovation, and diversity? The Song dynasty in China, 960 to 1279, was the leading example of diversity and innovation in Afro-Eurasia and the Americas during the 13th century. China enjoyed great wealth, political stability, and fine artistic and intellectual achievements. Neo-Confucian teachings, illustrated in the above quotation, supported the government and shaped social classes and the family system. In addition, China developed the greatest manufacturing capability in the world. However, the spread of Confucianism and Buddhism might be the most enduring testimony to Chinese influence. Government developments in the Song dynasty. The Song dynasty replaced the Tang in 960 and ruled for more than 3 centuries. They lost country of northern lands to invading pastoralists from Manchuria who set up the Jin Empire. Although the Song ruled a smaller region than the Tang, their reign was prosperous and under them the arts flourished. Bureaucracy. China's strength was partially the result of its imperial bureaucracy, a vast organization in which appointed officials carried out the empire's policies. The bureaucracy had been a feature of Chinese government since the Qing dynasty, 221 BCE to 207 BCE. It represented a continuity across centuries and dynasties. Under the Song, China's bureaucracy expanded. Early in the dynasty, this strengthened the dynasty. Meritocracy and the civil service exam. One of Emperor Song Taizou's greatest achievements was that he expanded the educational opportunities to young men of the lower economic classes so that they could score well on the civil service exams. By scoring well, a young man could obtain a highly desired job in the bureaucracy. These exams were based on knowledge of Confucian text. Because officials obtained their positions by demonstrating their merit on these exams, China's bureaucratic system was known as a meritocracy. Through the poor was vastly underrepresented in the bureaucracy, the Chinese system allowed for more upward mobility than other hiring systems of its time. However, by the end of the Song, the bureaucracy had grown so large that it contributed to the empire's weakness. By creating so many jobs and by paying these officials so handsomely, the Song increased the cost of government to a point that they began drying up China's surplus wealth. And as you can see here, there is a map of Song and Jin empires, which may be helpful when looking at a time frame and comparing to other maps in the future. Economic developments in post-classical China. The flourishing Tang dynasty had successfully promoted agricultural developments, improved roads and canals, encouraged foreign trade, and spread technology. These accomplishments led to rapid prosperity and population growth during the Song dynasty. The Grand Canal was an inexpensive and efficient internal waterway transportation system that extended over 30,000 miles. Expanding the canal enabled China, under the Song dynasty, to become the most populous trading area in the world. Gunpowder. Although gunpowder had been invented in China in previous dynasties, innovators in the Song dynasty made the first guns. Over centuries, the technology of making gunpowder and guns spread from China to all parts of Eurasia via traders on the Silk Roads. Agricultural productivity. Sometime before the 11th century, Champa rice, a fast-ripening and drought-resistant strain of rice from the Champa Kingdom in present-day Vietnam, greatly expanded agricultural production in China. This rice and other strains developed through experimentation allowed farming to spread to lands where once rice could not be grown, such as lowlands, riverbanks, and hills. In some areas, it also allowed farmers to grow 2 crops of rice per year, a summer and a winter crop. Innovative methods of production contributed to agricultural success. For example, Chinese farmers put manure, both human and animal, on the fields to enrich the soil. They built elaborate irrigation systems using ditches, water wheels, pumps, and terraces to increase productivity. New heavy plows, pulled by water buffalo or oxen, allowed previously unusable land to be cultivated. The combination of these changes in agriculture produced an abundance of food. As a result, China's population grew quickly. In the 3 centuries of Song dynasty rule, China's population increased from around 25% of the total world population to nearly 40%. Manufacturing and trade. Industrial production soared, as did China's population. China's discovery of black earth, coal, in the 4th century BCE enabled it to produce greater amounts of cast iron goods. Though massive use of coal to power machines wouldn't happen until the 18th century, China did have the greatest manufacturing capability in the world. The Chinese later learned how to take the carbon out of cast iron and began to manufacture steel. They used steel to make or reinforce bridges, gates, and ship anchors. They also used steel to make religious items such as pagodas and Buddhist figurines. Steel also strengthened the agricultural equipment, contributing to the abundance of food production as well. Under the Song, and earlier than in Western Europe, China experienced proto-industrialization, a set of economic changes in which people in rural areas made more goods than they could sell. Unlike later industrialization, which featured large-scale production in factories using complex machinery, proto-industrialization relied more on home-based or community-based production using simple equipment. For example, artisans or skilled craft workers produced steel and other products in widely dispersed smelting factories under the supervision of the imperial government. Artisans also manufactured porcelain and silk that reached consumers through expanding trade networks, especially by sea. Porcelain was highly desired because it was a lightweight yet strong. Further, it was light colored so it could be easily painted with elaborate designs. The Chinese used the compass in maritime navigation, and they redesigned their ships to carry more cargo. China's ability to print paper navigation charts made seafaring possible in open waters, out-of-sight lands, and sailors became less reliant on the sky for direction. China became the world's most commercialized society. Its economy changed from local consumption to market production, with porcelains, textiles, and tea for chief exports. The Grand Canal supported a vibrant internal trade, while advances in naval technology allowed China to control trade in the South China Sea. Taxes. The song also promoted the growth of commercial economy by changing how they built public projects, such as roads and irrigation canals. Instead of requiring that people labor on these projects, the government paid people to work on them. This change increased the amount of money in circulation, promoting economic growth. Tributes. Another source of income for the government came from the tributary system, an arrangement in which other states had to pay money or provide goods to honor to the Chinese emperor. This system cemented China's economic and political power over several foreign countries, but it also created economic stability and stimulated trade for all parties involved. The origins of the system existed in the Han Dynasty. By the time of the Song Dynasty, Japan, Korea, and kingdoms throughout Southeast Asia were tributary states. The emperor expected representatives from tributary states to demonstrate their respect by performing a kowtow, a ritual in which anyone greeting the Chinese emperor must bow his or her head until it reached the floor. The Chinese sent out tremendous fleets led by Zhang He to demonstrate the power of the emperor and to achieve tribute. Zhang He's voyages are described in more detail in Topic 2.3 or one of my later videos. Social structures in China. Through most of the Chinese history, the majority of people lived in rural areas. However, urban areas grew in prominence in the productive period. At the height of the Song Dynasty, China was the most urbanized land in the world, boasting several cities containing more than 100,000 people. The largest cities, Chang'an, an ancient capital, Hangzhou at the southern end of the Grand Canal, and the port city of Guangzhou were cosmopolitan metropolises, active centers of commerce with many entertainment options to offer. China's class structure. Through urbanization represented a significant development in China, life in rural areas grew more complex as well. The bureaucratic expansion created an entirely new social class, the scholarly gentry. They soon outnumbered the aristocracy, which was comprised of landowners who inherited their wealth. The scholar gentry were educated in Confucian philosophy and became the most influential social class in China. Three other classes ranked below the scholarly gentry: farmers, artisans, and merchants. The low status of merchants reflected on Confucian respect for hard work and creating value. The tasks of merchants did not require physical strength or endurance, and they simply exchanged goods without growing or making anything new. Lower rungs of Chinese society included peasants who worked for wealthy landowners, often to pay off debts, and the urban poor. The Song government provided aid to the poor and established public hospitals where people could receive free care. Role of women. Confucian traditions included both respect for women and the expectation that they were to defer to men. This patriarchal pattern strengthened during the Tang and Song dynasties. One distinctive constraint on women's activities in China was the practice of foot binding, which became common among aristocracy families during the Song dynasty. From a very young age, girls had their feet wrapped so tightly that the bones did not grow naturally. A bound foot signified social status, something suitors particularly desired. It also restricted women's ability to move and hence to participate in the public sphere. Foot binding was banned in 1912. intellectual and cultural developments. During the Tang and Song eras, China enjoyed affluence, a well-educated populace, and extensive contact with foreign nations. As a result, intellectual pursuits, technology, literature, and visual arts thrived. Paper and printing. The Chinese had invented paper as early as the 2nd century CE, and they developed a system of printing in the 7th century. They were the first culture to use wood block printing. A Buddhist scripture produced in the 7th century is thought to be the world's first woodblock printed work. For information on the Gutenberg press, a related technology, see topic 1.6 later in the playlist if you're watching from there. In the Song era, printed booklets on how to farm efficiently were distributed throughout the rice-growing regions. And as you can see here, here is an image of Chinese woodblock printing with the caption, "With the development of woodblock printing in China, people could make multiple copies of an or art or written text without laboriously copying each by hand." Reading and poetry. The development of paper and printing expanded the availability of books. Which most peasants were illiterate, China's privileged classes had increased access to literature. Confucian scholars not only consumed literature at tremendous rates, they were also the major producers of literature throughout the era. The Tang and Song dynasties' emphasis on schooling created generations of well-rounded scholar bureaucrats. Later, Europeans with such diverse skills would be called Renaissance men. Religious diversity in China. Buddhism had come to China from its birthplace in India via the Silk Roads. Its presence is evident during the Anarch period between the later Han and Sui dynasties. However, its popularity became widespread during the Tang dynasty. The 7th century Buddhist monk Xuanzang helped build Buddhism popularity in China. Buddhism and Daoism. 3 forms of Buddhism from India came to shape in Asia, each developing a different emphasis. Theravada Buddhism focused on personal spiritual growth through silent meditation and self-discipline. It became the strongest in Southeast Asia. Mahayana Buddhism focused on spiritual growth for all beings and on service. It became strongest in China and Korea. Tibetan Buddhism focused on chanting. It became the strongest in Tibet. All 3 include a belief in the 4 Noble Truths, which stress the idea that personal suffering can be alleviated by eliminating cravings or desires and by following Buddhist precepts. All 3 also embrace the Eightfold Path. The precepts, including right speech, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness, that can lead to enlightenment or nirvana. Monks introduced Buddhism to the Chinese by relating its beliefs to Daoist principles. For example, Buddhism's ideas of Dharma became translated as Dao, the way. Eventually, Buddhist doctrines combined with elements of Daoist traditions to create the syncretic or fused faith Chan Buddhism, also known as Zen Buddhism. Like Daoism, Zen Buddhism emphasized direct experience and meditation as opposed to formal learning based on studying scripture. Because of its fusion with Chinese beliefs, Buddhism became very popular in China. Monasteries, buildings where monks lived together, appeared in most major cities. The presence of these monasteries became a problem for the Tang bureaucracy. Many leaders of the Tang dynasty, which considered itself the Middle Kingdom, had trouble accepting that a foreign religion would have such prominence in society. Buddhism's popularity, which drew individuals away from the Chinese native religions, made Daoists and Confucians jealous. Despite monasteries, closures, and land seizures, however, Chan Buddhism remained popular among ordinary Chinese citizens. Buddhism and Neoconfucianism. The Song dynasty was somewhat more friendly towards Buddhism, but it did not go out of its way to promote the religion. It preferred to emphasize China's native traditions, such as Confucianism. However, Buddhism had a strong presence, and many Confucians began to adopt its ideals into their daily lives. The development of printing had made Buddhist scriptures widely available to the Confucian scholar gentry. The Song dynasty benefited from the Confucian idea of filial piety, the duty of family members to support their desires to those of the male head of the family and to the ruler. The emphasis on respect for one's elders helped the Song maintain their rule in China. Neoconfucianism. Involved in China between 770 and 840. It was a syncretic system combining rational thought with more abstract ideas of Taoism and Buddhism. This new incarnation of Confucianism emphasized ethics rather than the mysteries of God and nature. It became immensely popular in the countries in China's orbit, including Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. Comparing Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. An important dynamic in the histories of Japan, Korea, and Vietnam was each country's relationship with China. When China was unified, its political strength, economic wealth, religious traditions, and intellectual advances and technological innovations made the world's most powerful realm. Its smaller neighbors benefited from being so close to China, but faced a challenge of maintaining their own distinctive cultures. Each had to confront this issue of signification or the assimilation of Chinese traditions and practices. Japan. Since Japan was separated from China by sea rather than land, it had more ability to control its interactions with China than Korea or Vietnam could. The impact of Chinese culture appeared in many aspects of life. Japan's Prince Sotoku Taishi, 574 to 622, promoted Buddhism and Confucianism along with Japan's traditional Shinto religion. During this era, Japan learned how to do woodblock printing from China. During the Heian period, 794 to 1185, Japan emulated Chinese traditions in politics, arts, and literature. However, Japanese writers also moved in new directions. For example, in the 11th century, a Japanese writer composed the world's first novel, The Tale of Genji. It is the story of a Japanese prince and his life at court. Particularly has many romances. Feudalism. For hundreds of years, Japan had been a feudal society without a centralized government. Landowning aristocrats, the daimyo, battled for the control of land, while the majority of people worked as rice farmers. Japanese feudalism was similar to European feudalism, which is described in Topic 1.6. Both featured very little social mobility, and both systems were built upon hereditary hierarchies. In Japan, peasants known as serfs were born into lives of economic dependency, while samurai were born into their roles as protectors and daimyo were born into lives of privilege. In Europe, the three groups were serfs, knights, and nobles. What distinguishes Japanese feudalism from that of Europe was that the daimyo enjoyed much more power than the nobility in Europe did. The daimyo ruled over vast stretches of land and in reality were more powerful than either the emperor or the shogun. By contrast, Europe's hierarchy placed the monarch above the nobility. Though there were periods when authority of the monarch wanted money and power was distributed among nobility, the main centralized power structure of European feudalism would not change until the modern industrial era. In Europe, the ideal knight held to the code of chivalry, with duty to countrymen, duty to God, and duty to women, the last expressed through country love and the virtues of gentleness and graciousness. In China, the code was known as Bushido, and stressed in fragility, loyalty, and martial arts, and honor unto death. Japan also differed from China in how it was governed. China was ruled by an emperor who oversaw a large civilian bureaucracy. For much of its history, China had a central government strong enough to promote trade and peace. In contrast, when the Heian court declined, a powerful land-owning family, the Minamoto clan, took charge. In 1192, the Minamoto installed a shogun, or military ruler, to reign through Japan, and though Japan still had an emperor, he had little power. For the following 4 centuries, Japan suffered from regional rivalries among aristocrats. Not until the 17th century would shoguns create a strong central government that could unify the country. Korea. Korea's location gave it a very direct relationship with China. The countries shared a land boundary, and China extended both the North and South Korea. Similarity to China. Through its tributary relationship, Korea and China were in close contact. Thus, Korea emulated many aspects of Chinese politics and culture. It centralized its government in the style of the Chinese. Culturally, Koreans adopted both Confucian and Buddhist beliefs. The educated elite studied Confucian classics, while Buddhist doctrine attracted the peasant masses. Koreans adopted the Chinese writing system, which proved to be very awkward. The Chinese and Korean languages remained structurally very different. In the 15th century, Korea began its own writing system. Powerful aristocracy. One important difference between Korea and China was the land aristocracy were more powerful in China than in Korea. Wait, sorry, were more powerful in Korea than in China. As a result, the Korean elites were able to prevent certain Chinese reforms from ever being implemented. For example, through there was a Korean civil service examination, it was not open to peasants. Thus, was no truly merit-based system for entering the bureaucracy. Vietnam. Like Japan and Korea, Vietnam traded with and learned from China. For example, Vietnam adapted the Chinese writing system in architectural styles. However, Vietnam had a more adversarial relationship with China. At times, the Vietnamese launched violent rebellions against Chinese influence. Gender and social structure. Vietnamese culture differed from China culture in several ways, which explains the strong resistance to Chinese power. For example, Vietnamese women enjoyed greater independence in their married lives than did Chinese women in the Confucian tradition. While the Chinese lived in extended families, the Vietnamese preferred nuclear families, just a wife, husband, and their children. Vietnamese villages operated independently of a national government. Political centralization was non-existent. Although Vietnam adopted a merit-based bureaucracy of educated men, the Vietnamese system did not function like the Chinese scholar bureaucracy. Instead of loyalty to the emperor, scholar officials in Vietnam owned more allegiance to the village peasants. In fact, Vietnamese scholars or officials often led revolts against the government if they deemed it too oppressive. Vietnamese women resented their inferior status under the Chinese. In particularly, they had rejected the customs of foot binding and polygamy, the practice of having more than one wife at the same time. In spite of Vietnamese efforts to maintain the purity of their own culture, sinification didn't occur. Military conflict with China. As the Tang dynasty began to crumble in the 8th century, Vietnamese rebels pushed out China's occupying army. In their battle against the Chinese, they showed a strong capacity for guerrilla warfare, perhaps due to their deep knowledge of their own land. Key terms by theme. Economics, China. Champa rice, proto-industrialization, artisans. Society, China. Scholar gentry, filial piety. Environment, China. Grand Canal. Government, China. Song dynasty, imperial bureaucracy, meritocracy. Technology, China. Woodblock printing. Culture, China. Foot binding, Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism. Syncretic. Chan Zen Buddhism. Neoconfucianism. Government, Japan. Heian period. Culture, Vietnam. Nuclear families. Polygamy. However, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for today's episode, and I hope you really enjoyed our first reading of the AP World History Modern AMSCO textbook. I certainly did, and honestly, it really is bringing a couple of memories back, because honestly, this certainly was a very influential chapter, because it really does show a major contrast in China in the past, and China in what would later be some of its own worst years, like in the 1800s, or the 19th century, in other words, where it would suffer many embarrassments, such as shown through the Opium War, Taiping Rebellion, and various others, as well as its own division into spheres of influence. However, ladies and gentlemen, I really hope you enjoyed the video. Please like the video, hit the subscribe button, and also make sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date and when I post more content. Coming right up next is Chapter 1.2. And again, remember, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe, stay happy, and remember Stay entertained.